Hi, guys. I'm Mark Snowden with the Cincinnati Area Baptist Association, and we have a lot of the team members of the 7-person team that helped put together this Youth Evangelism Study Group report. It was presented at our annual meeting in October, but it has been a 6-month process for the 7-person team. And I think we had a good mixture of youth or student workers and also some pastors that participated as well. We want to spend just the next few minutes talking about the paper. It is on CincinnatiBaptist.com. You can go kind of down to the bottom left and take a look at the paper and some other position papers that the association has taken. Jason, thank you very much for serving as the chairman. I appreciate that greatly, kind of herding cats with what you did. And I'm so sorry that you were sick from COVID. And I'm sure the association annual meeting participants are sorry that they had to hear from me rather than you doing an overview of the paper. But if you could just walk through a little bit of why this was important to do in the first place, and we can get some discussion going and watch Danny drive, and we can do okay. Thanks.
Yeah, we took on this project at Mark's request, really in response to Vision 2025 put out by the executive committee. And that was originally to see an increase in student baptisms and discipleship. And then obviously, as we approached the annual convention, the messengers changed that to be really children all the way through student ministry. Understanding that the SBC is in a 20-year decline of baptisms, and realizing that specifically those under the age of 18 are really struggling right now within the church by and large. We took on this task of really identifying what problems and obstacles churches are facing that are coming from the culture, coming from within the family units. And we tried to identify what different obstacles were standing in people's way. And we also tried to identify some solutions to those obstacles. Not every church is the same, and not every church faces the same situations, but we wanted to give some resources and some thoughts so that way every church, especially in CABA and elsewhere, would be able to take away something for the context of where they're at and the challenges they're facing. And so really that's kind of the background of why we got together and our task that was at hand, and kind of our general, hey, this is what we're going to do. Moving forward, we're going to identify problems, we're going to talk through solutions, and try to put together not necessarily a comprehensive, but we're going to try to do our best to put something together that can be a blessing and an encouragement to every pastor out there who's facing the dilemma of really declining children and youth at their church. And so that's the background, unless you wanted me to give more anything else.
No, that's a good introduction, good start. I know that one of the things that I appreciated the team trying to identify on the problem and the obstacles and that kind of thing is comparing what older adults that we might be rubbing shoulders with, perhaps 73% of their generation was actively involved in some type of religious belief system, where I think you guys found where it was 12% for the current generation. And that's just staggering when I hear that. That really gives a good positioning for how this paper was presented, and realizing that, people of my generation may just say, well, we just need to preach more at them or something. But you came up with 6 obstacles. Now, what are these the obstacles to? These are the obstacles to teenagers and children perhaps not coming to faith in Christ, or What would you say that these are obstacles to?
I think the heart behind it was that these are the obstacles that churches are facing in reaching young people. We in the report, you'll see we use the term young people just to basically reference everyone that is 18 or below.
Sure.
And so these obstacles are just the things that are facing churches that if you do not respond well, it has devastating effects. And so these are different areas that we felt were important to address. And also, I think for people to not feel alone. I mean, you talk to a lot of youth guys across the country, and there's a lot of times where they're facing the same problem, but they feel really isolated and alone. Like nobody else is having this issue. I don't know how to handle it, but I don't know that I could talk to anybody about it because is anybody else facing it as well? And what we found is that there is collectively these problems across the board that churches are facing. And so the hope is that groups, that churches will be able to identify, hey, yeah, we see these issues, we see these certain issues, and maybe this is how we can address it moving forward.
No, that's okay. Tyler or Ken, feel free to jump in here talking about these 6 issues. If there were 1 or 2 that stood out to you, what would they be?
I know the issues of sometimes parents delegating, reaching the young people to the church, as opposed to taking that responsibility for training up a child. That's always been an issue, but it's especially seems like now. We try to farm that out.
I think you used the phrase, leave it to the professionals. One of the things that I'm concerned about is today to work with youth and children in our church, you almost have to, well, I believe you do, have to run a background check. And so that immediately puts those guys in your church body into a little bit of a different arena. And unfortunately, with pedophiles, those with maybe some criminal background and have ulterior motives, certainly shapes that. And I get that. But I appreciate you guys at least identifying that as an issue. I think that is big, that you just delegating. It's the old thing in our generation, if I could say, Ken, where we used to, no, we would drop our kids off at, our generation would drop the kids off at church and then, go to the grocery store or run errands or whatever for an hour and then come back after, the kids were together and or doing whatever they were doing. That used to be, I know, a big beef, but today, children seem to be, and teenagers seem to be a little more isolated in our churches. So is that kind of what you were talking about? That they're just sort of relegated to the professionals?
Well, you have to realize too, teenagers are isolated because of our society. Our society has pushed, when we're specifically talking about teenagers and even preteens, every child that has a smartphone in their hand is being pushed towards isolationism. They're being told that the way to connect with people is simply to watch them online. I can know what these people are doing because I see what they post. I follow their threads, this, that, and the other. And so our culture is pushing our teenagers and young people to be isolated. But then you get into the church setting, and sadly, the church has relegated the responsibility of children and youth to the youth workers or children's workers. Instead of seeing that the church is supposed to be a community, really with the push of the mega church movement, I think that's kind of when we started to see this, because youth groups, exploded. When we're talking like the late 90s, youth groups exploded. And so it was up to the youth staff to maintain and work the youth ministry, and everyone else was hands off. Well, now you fast forward to where we are in most people's contexts. They're not in a large church, mega church setting with hundreds of teenagers. people still have that mentality, where are the young people? Well, somebody should go talk to the youth pastor. Well, I mean, when you see a teenager, are you engaging them? When you see a family with kids, are you engaging them? And the consensus was that churches in general, if we have to make some generalizations, see children's ministry and youth ministry as separate entities, and the only people responsible for those entities are those workers. And we've got to change that within the culture of the church to realize that it's the entire church's responsibility to reach families and children and teenagers. We need that intergenerational connectivity because, like I said, our students are young people. Any child with a smartphone is being pushed towards isolation. And when they're pushed there, they don't have a way to connect to people.
I applaud one of our churches that actually printed off this document. We had our annual meeting on Monday, October 4th, where this was presented. And on October 6th, this pastor printed out copies for every adult that would attend Wednesday night Bible study. And they actually presented that document to them and then spent the whole time praying over it, but also discussing what it meant for them and their church. And I think one of the deals that got to this pastor was the idea that we can't relegate it, that it's all of our responsibility. And then how do we recognize, some of the natural limits, but others, other issues as well. Tyler, feel free to chime in here.
I think something that we talked about was a good way to look at it is your generation's ceiling is the next generation's foundation. So we need to be working together to help mentor and pour into the lives of that next generation. And I think so often what we discover is that people are scared to do it because they feel like they're not equipped to do it. And so that's where we got to bring in trainings, and we got to bring in the right people to be able to help pour into generations so that they know how to pour into the lives of those that are much younger than them. And I think that, I'll give you an example. Just this past Sunday, I had a gentleman who is an older gentleman in our church. He just started volunteering in preschool, and he came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity." He said, "I've never done it before." And he said, now, he said, they're pouring into me as I'm trying to pour into them. And I think that it's because we tried to explain to them that you have a lot of life lessons that you now can teach this younger generation so that they know how to continue to put God first.
That's awesome.
And here's the thing. I went to a conference and they said, you can't ask people to fill holes. And I feel like somewhere along the way, churches saw openings as holes, and we started just plugging holes. And what they said at this conference was, you have to ask people to come make a difference, because people want to make a difference. Like Tyler mentioned, this adult, it's like he wanted to make a difference, and now it's making a difference in his own life because of that. It's that nature of God, that when the more you serve, the more God begins to really pour into you. And I think part of that too is we've got to get people plugged in, but we can't just be filling holes. How we present it, how we recruit people. If we ask people, "Hey man, I've got a hole in the youth group, I've got to shove an adult in there, will you do it?" That's a lot different than saying, "Hey, I need someone to come make a difference in the lives of these teenagers." And ultimately the response is people are going to rise up when they know that you're calling them to make a difference. If they're just there, if they're just a warm body filling a hole, they're not going to feel that connected or purposeful.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's good. Danny, do you have any comment on that? Maybe tough.
No, not really.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get back to you because I've got a sidebar that I included in this before we went to print, and I appreciate it, and I'll take responsibility for that in the paper. Are there any other of these 6 obstacles that you guys wanted to talk about? One of the surprises for me was mental health. In my generation, that was never talked about. And you guys have been really, really upfront about that. And I'm looking to see what I can do. I know that COVID-19 made a lot of stressors on children and teenagers that no generation has had, at least that's alive today. And I didn't know if you guys wanted to talk about the mental health issue.
Yeah, I think the mental health issue, I did a lot of the research on that, so I'll speak to it. But we are seeing devastating effects of a confused society that is pushing various different narratives that don't align with one another, creating more confusion and more anxiety and stress. You have, according to the last statistics, I saw 50% of young people that'd be under the age of 18, and they were specifically looking at 13 to 18-year-olds. They said 50% of them would technically classify as clinically depressed. If they went in to see a counselor, they would be clinically depressed and probably put on some sort of psychotropic drug. From that same study, they found that, I believe, I'm pulling it up over here on my sidebar, 1 out of 3, specifically 13 to 18-year-olds, have contemplated suicide in the last 30 days. This is an epidemic of crazy proportions that unfortunately our society has thrust on our students. I just read an article 2 days ago about how elementary schools are seeing a 20% increase every year in suicidal conversations with counselors and aggressive behavior, a 20% increase every year for the last 2 years. And we're seeing this. And how does the church respond? Now, I don't have all the answers. And I know that a lot of youth guys don't feel qualified at times to deal with maybe mental health issues. Sometimes the mental health issues stem from family problems and things like that. And so that's why we wanted to address it, because it's just so huge. Just in my youth group here 2 years ago, I did a quick calculation, and it was 1 out of every 3 students had done some sort of self-harm within the last year. 1 out of every 3. And the kids here that I'm dealing with, most of their parents have been coming to church for at least 5 to 6 years. They're regular attenders. They seem to have good lives. None of them are, like below a poverty line or anything like that. These are kids from seemingly solid homes that regularly come to church, and 1 in 3 of them have had to deal with cutting. And so self-harm. And so I think we've got to realize that this is the reality of working with students. And sadly, it's becoming the reality of working with even preteens down into 3rd grade. We're seeing a rise in self-harm and these things because our students don't know how to cope. Part of coping skills is learning to live in community. We're pushing students into our society is pushing students into isolation, which then damages their ability to cope. They don't know how to cope. They don't know how to communicate. And we've got to be able to identify those problems and get people help. Sometimes if it's a family crisis, we've got to step out and talk to the parents. I mean, I've had to do it. I've had to call up parents and say, hey, we got to talk. Like, I've had some confidential conversations with your student, but I can't not talk to you about this. And I've had to coach some parents through it. And then I've had some other students that have some more serious issues, and I've had to refer them out. And I think that across the board, it would be a great idea if our association, especially in the CABA area, we just had a list of resources that we can each compile, like, hey, I know of this counseling resource. I know of this counseling resource. And so that way, if someone's in a church and they have, man, this family is crumbling and their kid is suicidal, and you're maybe a Bivo pastor, you don't feel qualified maybe to take it on. You haven't taken counseling classes. you can reach out and go and get a list and say, okay, well, let's look at some of these resources that are near you that you could go to. And you know what? A lot of them are free. A lot of these, there are quite a few biblical counseling resources out there that are free. And it'd be great for us to be able to have that. So whenever churches find themselves in that situation, they would be ready to respond with help.
All right. Well, I appreciate the input here, guys. Ken, I didn't know on college campuses, or Tyler, in the youth groups that you've seen, or Danny with youth, if you have been able to identify resources. I would love to receive those from all of you and start building a database. I have had the opportunity to be approached by a mental health professional that heard about this, and she is saying that she would be available, A, for counseling, and B, for providing that network of resources that we've talked about doing. So we hope to be able to do that as well. Some of the other things on here definitely deal with parent. Oh, I'm sorry, Kim, before we move on.
Let me just mention one thing we've been doing this semester, beginning this semester, is we've arranged for a Christian counseling intern to come and spend a full day on campus once a week. And students can make appointments, come in and visit once, or continuing, and it's just up to them. But we've got this young man coming in at no cost to us or the students, because he's filling internship requirements. He has to have so many hours of supervised ministry. And I just happen to know a Christian counselor in the area that came down and did some listening training for us on campus with our leaders, with our staff leaders at the H2O church. And through him, I was able to arrange having an intern come in. There's probably not a whole lot of these Christian counseling interns out there, but if you had a church that wanted to arrange something similar, I think it would be worth looking into, because these young men and women are being trained in all this kind of counseling and listening, and all these techniques could come out and be of service to your congregation. And possibly it'd be a, inexpensive, if not relatively free kind of thing. I think it may not be totally free, but it's very inexpensive.
Okay.
For what they have to draw.
That's good. Anybody else? I appreciated the way that you guys laid this out, and I appreciated having, the parents' role influencing kids' schedules and busyness, that kind of thing. But the issue that I personally appreciated you getting the most, and it'll make a transition from a problem to the solution, was what you were looking at generic discipleship. Just having somebody accept Christ, to get baptized, they're in the herd and they're not becoming disciple makers. They're not being addressed, and they are just showing up, and the teacher and everybody else in the church assumes that they're saved if they show up, despite if they were looking for a date, or if they were, whatever reason they had for wanting to be in the youth group, for sure. When you outlined how you were looking at issues, you had solutions in the personal role for the student or the child, you had parents, and then you had the church. And I really like the way that you outlined that, for sure. As you take a look at kids accepting Christ, Danny, you had a pretty strong email to me and to others as well. And if you want to start your video, I had muted it when it was roaming around the cabin of your car or whatever. But I would love to hear from you, Danny, about some of the comments you made that I thought were pretty strong, about seeking genuine truth instead of the world's truth that they're being served up in the school system.
Well, generally speaking, the part where I was coming from is one of the things that my students in particular were picking is right now, students as a whole are learning at such an advanced rate. One of the comments my son was saying is, in particular, he's learning stuff that I learned 2 years after he did. It was just kind of interesting. It's one of those, they are thrusting our students into a more advanced educational process than what I had. And I know even what students in the last 10 years have had. And churches as a whole, one of the things I've noticed within churches is while the educational system has been advancing, we have been still teaching at the same level that we were before. We weren't challenging those students.
Okay.
We weren't completely focused on whole truths. And you know, I shared those examples like David and a slingshot. Well, it wasn't really a slingshot. It was a sling. You know, and as students
We
started
dropped you
to
there,
even
Danny. What were you saying? It
progress
wasn't really, you were saying it really wasn't a slingshot. It was a what now?
it was a sling.
Yeah, sling.
A
Sure.
slingshot and a sling are two different things.
Yeah.
But you know, little story, little lies that we share to kind of make the story seem a little bit more realistic at times, you know, it sways and deters students. And any small thing that deters from the whole truth kind of gives them a reason to turn away from what we're saying and what we're trying to teach. And as they're graduating out, one of the big circumstances and we see is there's this big, massive decline within teenagers moving out and stopping to attend church. I think I read somewhere where the average child jumps out of ministry before they even hit middle school, which was kind of a shocking fact to me because I'm a youth pastor and there is kind of that disconnect where we are tackling it in the way that I think is biblical as much as it is, you know, we need to empower the parents to take an active role of responsibility, which would be a really great thing. But we haven't really, as youth ministers and ministers, been doing such a fabulous job at reaching young people that we are here searching for a way to do so. And now it seems like we're just content passing the buck back to the parents, which is something that should very well be, you know, but I guess the test would be for us is how are we going to empower and teach the parents to do that and facilitate that? And then if we fail in that, what's our next excuse? I think we just need to take a deep, hard look at ourselves as ministers and really take a step towards teaching whole truths. And you know, since really refocusing our ministry at our church to teaching them the hard stuff, I have found that they have just been continually growing and are now taking active roles in trying to, they actually came to me recently and says, I do not want to fall into that cycle of leaving the church. I want to know more. Teach me so that I can be a future leader. They want to know.
You're raising the bar is the point. You're raising the bar.
Yes, you got to raise the bar.
And helping parents raise the bar for accountability and expectations, I'm assuming. You said we need to present the gospel to them without fear, and in doing so, we will suit students to know the Lord at an exponential rate. And we all do believe that God has the power, and I appreciate what you said there. Do others have input at this level as well about helping parents succeed as disciple makers?
Well, something that I have that, yes, I agree that what's happened in student ministry is oftentimes these students are coming into a church for the first time ever, maybe, and the topics that are being discussed are too simple, because they walk in and they say, wow, like, I'm too much of a sinner to be involved in this student ministry. They're talking about baby stuff that I've already dealt with, right? And so I think that as leaders, we have to say, what are these students dealing with? What does scripture say on how to deal with it? And how do we, work through that? And one of the things that I talked about in one of our conversations was laying things out. And it was kind of making sure that we're equipped with the right stuff. And so actually what's right behind me, which helps, let me kind of pan up just a little bit more. So this is my year calendar and students right here on my back wall. And what you'll see is the top part, which is the orange part. That's kind of like a discipleship stuff. And then you have all the red stickers that are right here at the top. Those are all of my series for each month. And then you have the games that are in this part right here. And then you have the events, which are in the green. But then all this blue stuff right here, that all is stuff that I give and hand out to all of my volunteers to help equip my volunteers to know how to deal with and talk about and help these students whenever they're in small groups. But then you have all the pink stuff that's right here. All that pink stuff is what I give to all my parents. So each month I'm giving an email to my parents to help them with books that they can read, videos that they can watch, and so on how to deal with these specific topics that their children are dealing with. And so I try to lay it out to where I'm partnering with my volunteers, with my leaders, but I'm also partnering with the parents. And we're having discussions about things that these students are dealing with in their daily life.
That's a great chart. I appreciate that very much. What's it's a monthly, month by month timeline for the different aspects that you're dealing with. That's cool. I appreciate that. Anybody else have a comment about trying to address some of these issues? Especially, we've kind of gotten into talking about parents and then raising the bar for children and adults as well, especially if, how do you keep children from leaving the church before they're ever in a youth group?
You got to connect their parents. I mean, until they're 16 and they can drive themselves, if you don't have the parents locked into what you're doing, you're not going to have them. The parents, everything else is still more of a priority, and we kind of hit on priorities. But I mean, part of, we've got to come at them with truth, and we got to help parents come alongside. I think a lot of parents really are unaware of the spiritual attack that is going on in public education on our children. I mean, if we look at the things that have been leaked out in the last couple months, examples all the way down to kindergarten and first grade, confusing genders. And we have to realize evolutionary principles are being taught as young as kindergarten, and these things, there's a consequence of not being aware of the attack that's going on. And I feel like that's kind of where we are. And that's why we have to come alongside our parents and we have to help them, because some parents are aware, but they don't know how to deal with it. And some parents are clueless that their kids are under spiritual attack in the classroom, from teachers, through curriculum, through the books they're reading. And it's not just on our college campuses. It is going down all the way into kindergarten now with some of the stuff that's coming out. And it's one of those things we've got to come alongside our parents. We got to help them. We've got to equip them, but then we do have to help our parents see that they are the primary biblical imparters of truth, of God's truth to their kids. We are to come alongside them. I don't see it as an excuse to say that, hey, we got to help parents because they're the primary disciple makers. Because I truly believe that if we look at the pages of scripture, we see that it is the parents' role to impart these things, and we're simply coming alongside them and helping them. We obviously understand that in today's society, almost 50% of students and even children come from broken homes. And that has a devastating impact on the way that truth is taught whenever you have parents who are trying to manipulate the kid to their side. And so there's not uniformity in parenting, and we understand that. But when parents negate their role and think that the church is going to save their kid and keep their kid on track, that never works. Just time and time again, it does not work. We've got to reach our parents. We've got to help equip our parents to be in the role that God's called them to be in.
Well, you talked about finding opportunities to love on parents and then provide resources for them. How do you do that with credibility? I taught the parents of teenagers for 5.5 years when we lived in another town. And we had the parents there, but we just discipled them. We didn't disciple them with their kids in mind. Our curriculum that we used did not do that. Do we need to have a different curriculum? Are you seeing that we need to have discipleship change for parents from what we currently have? Tyler, you're nodding your head there. I didn't know if I struck a nerve, man.
Well, no, I mean, I think that obviously each church is different, right? Because each budget is different. And so not every church is able to afford the best that's out there. You know what I mean? And so what can we do to help partner with these churches so that they can have the best that's out there for a more affordable cost for their budget? Because the curriculum that I'm using, that I have right here on the wall that I showed you guys, it's not the cheapest curriculum that's out there, but yet it gives you all these tools on how to connect with your parents and how to reach out to your volunteers and everyone else. And so what can we do as a association to help equip every one of the churches that's in our area?
No, that's a wonderful challenge and a great resource that may mean we start identifying and then sharing more freely between youth leaders, between pastors, and sharing and identifying and sharing those resources. I think that's a great challenge for any association to do. And we've already talked about knowing what the public education system is teaching. That's another thing that's a little bit of a challenge, to be teaching to be teaching parents of teenagers and not have a clue what's going on with especially the more moral and spiritual aspects of what they're talking about. We can still continue to talk, but we're talking about the church at large as well. We talked about delegating youth. Now, I was a part of a church plant before coming to Cincinnati. And in my small group, we had 7 and 8-year-olds, and we had retirees and everybody in between. It was a challenge as the small group leader to be able to really get the children involved and have the older adults involved. The good news is everybody recognized that they were in a multi-generational environment, and everyone was extremely polite to everyone else in the group to make sure that you're getting things covered. Not every church is going to do that. I mean, at a church plant, you can have the DNA from the very beginning. Most of our CABA churches would not see that as a possibility to integrate their children and their teenagers with adult groups, but yet it's great to have that connectivity with the older adults in the church, or basically the church at large. Do you have any? You've got some practical suggestions here about a grandparent program and adopt a family program in this day and age of, again, having to get background checks and that kind of thing? Would that just be maybe normal that you would do if you're doing some type of grandparent program? Or do you just say, hey, let's get these families connected? What can we do practically to help our churches be more involved in influencing teenagers and children with the gospel?
You know, the idea of it's an idea that I'm playing around with here. The whole Adopt a Family program is, we've got a solid amount of senior adults, and they meet monthly and have fellowships and things like that, but they are not necessarily connected or plugged in with our younger families. And my thought was that the thought behind it is that you just simply are kind of partnering people, not for anything official, but just hey, here's the family you're going to be praying for every week. Find opportunities to look for them at church. Find opportunities to send them, a card in the mail. If it's a mom with young children, she might need some encouragement from a woman who's down the road and has her kids gone, saying,
Sure.
hey, you're doing a great job. Press on. I've been there. I've had those sleepless nights. Just the whole idea coming out of 1st and 2nd Timothy, that the older train up the younger, that there's this partnership between the generations. And for me, in our context here, I thought that'd be a great thing. I mean, I could just make up some little flashcards with church directory photos and with names and say, hey, who's gonna target this family? And then you could also reverse it with your children or youth or both, and say, hey, adopt a grandparent kind of thing. You're nothing official, just, hey, you're looking for them at church. You're praying for them. You're not, calling them every day of the week, but you're touching base, you're building a relationship. And now the advantage is people have somebody to lean on. All of a sudden you have a young family in crisis. They already have a built-in connection with an older, mature couple who they can go for to try to get through the crisis, whether the crisis is a marital crisis or it's a crisis with a child. And then it's the same with a teenager. If you have a teenager or even a middle schooler building a relationship with a senior adult that they see at church, they pray for them. And then all of a sudden they've got, maybe somebody bullying them, or they've got a question and they're not sure they can talk to their parents about it. They have a built-in relationship now with somebody who they can talk to and feel confident that they can get some advice from. The whole segregated, the youth are all in this corner and the children are all over here. It doesn't promote that, where you have teenagers at times where they're having conflict with their parents and they feel like they can't necessarily talk to a grandparent or family member, but they're looking for that connectivity. And yeah, sometimes they'll talk to their youth leader, but if they had another adult in their life who could impart biblical wisdom, who had built a relationship with them, who they knew was praying for them weekly, you're building in that multi-generational connection. Plus, then when people get to church, they're not just going into the same place, talking to the same 5 people in the pew next to them. They're looking for that other young family. They're looking for that grandparent. They're walking across the church to make a connection, just trying to find ways to go, let's connect people. Let's be very purposeful in how we connect people.
So after you've got them connected and they're together and they're in different relationships and you've got curriculum and like that, how do you actually lead a teenager or a child to Christ? Are you seeing different things that work? A canned approach, or is it like 3 circles, or is this through a testimony? And are you training? Do we need to be training our youth and children to be able to witness with others? I know when my daughter was a freshman in high school, they had senior girls in our high school youth group that would lead a Bible study, and almost every Bible study, every 3rd or 4th lesson would have some kind of evangelistic perspective there. How do you help children be able to take that step of faith, and how do you help teenagers take a step of faith? Danny, you've had some good success with that at Clough Pike. I didn't know if you wanted to just address that. You've so far in the past year and so, you've had several baptisms. I've appreciated greatly what's been going on there. How are these kids hearing about Jesus, and when is that appropriate moment to share people with Jesus?
Honestly, and that's, I mean, it's been my struggle with this, is a lot of the stuff that we are discussing is stuff to try to fix and minister within the local congregation. One of the big things that we, like I said, it's just the kids that are in our present program know that when they come, they're going to get the truth. And we are going to share the hard stuff, and we're going to discuss it, and we're going to approach it. And one of the things, like
Losing you, Danny. Sorry.
it's just been amazing. Our young people are reaching other young people. They're bringing in their friends because they know that we are providing them with the truth. And I wish I could say it's an easy process to go, oh, this kid's ready for it. But it's one of those totally a God thing. I remember somebody came in and they brought their friend, and I said, he's next. And everybody's like, what do you mean he's next? I says, God's telling me he's next. And within a matter of weeks, he was next. And it's
You
just,
mean next as he
I
came
think
to faith in Christ and was baptized?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's seeing the excitement and the passion of students reaching other students, and continuing to reach out. It's basically the young people are taking, that Adopt a Family program, Adopt a Grandparent program, and instead of adopting a grandparent or adopting a family, they're adopting their neighbor. They're adopting their friends. They're bringing them in and introducing them to their parents. They're bringing them in and introducing them to their church. And as a result, they are just expanding upon that. It's just been truly amazing to see. And I think a lot of that has to do with they know they are getting the truth. They know that God is at work in this place. Our vision 2025 is to go and increase baptisms, but part of that is increasing discipleship and showing the love of Christ. And I think it needs to go beyond just our walls.
Danny, with these that you've, excuse me, Danny, with those that you've shared the unvarnished truth with, is there any specific scripture or approach that you take, or what are you doing so that the kids hear the full gospel?
Every kid is different. I mean, the approach as it relates to one child is different from the other because you have to discern, kind of their background. I mean, one of the kids that we have coming here, you're right, it has very much mental health issues, has no parents at home, has adoptive parents who have put him up for adoption and sent him to different places. And he is struggling with what the outside world has done to him. But in the same token, he's coming to church and he's seeing a youth pastor who was once a house parent who is recognizing
we're
and
losing you,
teaching
Danny.
him about.
Go back. We were losing you there. You said he sees a guy in you that was a what now?
He sees a youth pastor that who was once a house parent at a children's home.
Gotcha. Thank you. I appreciate it. What about the rest of you guys? When you share the gospel,
the more we show people that love, the more and more you're going to start seeing people come to know Jesus. I mean, yes, those are all very real issues, and we face them, but we have an answer in the love of who Jesus is that we have to daily present that to whoever comes our way.
Okay.
Did I go
All right,
in and
well-
out? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's fading in and out. Sorry. What about the rest of you guys with how you share Christ? Is there some advice or counsel that you would have to other ministers of youth or other parents looking to share Christ? I mean, when's the best time to do that? I know when my daughter was a child, we waited, we shared the gospel, we told her how things were and as we went on in life. But then when she started asking questions, we felt like that was the time. And she started asking questions as she was turning 7, so early in 7. And that led to her salvation and baptism. But with a teenager, middle schooler, is it different? Do you wait until they ask questions, or do you simply sit down and say, hey, I'd like to go through this track with you? I mean, what's being done these days that's effective that you would recommend?
I think that for most students, the most powerful thing is a testimony. And I think if we can train our students who are believers how to share their testimony, it becomes infectious. People can not believe a track or something printed and think it's bogus. But when you talk to somebody about the change in your own life and what God has done to you, they can't really deny that. So there's power there because it is your testimony. And so I really think one of the most powerful things I've seen is when training students to share their testimony and showing them that it's not scary or difficult, and also helping some of these Christian kids realize that it's okay to say, I got saved when I was 7. I wasn't doing hard drugs or having sex or, sneaking out of the house at night. Like, it's okay if your testimony is that you were saved when you were young, because what has God done in your life? And so being able to share that, I have found, is really impactful, especially for young people, but not just teenagers. I mean, we're talking even down into middle school and even upper elementary school. The powerful, just a testimony, someone sharing a testimony about what God has done in their life, what God has saved them from, and how God gives them the strength each day, makes a big difference. I do like the 3 circles. You've mentioned that. I feel like it's very easy to communicate. And so usually if I have a teenager maybe asking questions or something, and maybe they've heard my testimony or they've heard somebody else's testimony, I do like to go to the 3 circles, just because I feel like it's simple, but it's profound, and they can relate to it.
No, like that. How about the rest of you guys? When you're wanting to share the Christ or share the gospel.
I agree. I think a lot of it is through testimony. It's your story, right? Like, so my daughter, my oldest daughter, she's 7. She has yet to have fully made the decision, but yet, I mean, I know that Christ is working in her life, right? And so she's asking us questions often. And so we're trying to tell her, this is how God has, done this in mommy and daddy's life. And so it's helping her understand more. But then what I'm also seeing is even though she hasn't fully made the decision, she's then going to all the little girls in our cul-de-sac and she's talking about God to them. Well, it's because that's what's in her life. That's what she's seeing. That's what she's involved with.
Yeah.
And I think the same goes for the students, is if you give them the tools, which is the Bible, right? And what's in the Bible and what Jesus has given us, then they can go to school, they can live their life for Christ, and they look different, which then people say, well, why are they different? What's going on in their life? Why do they act and react the way they do? Well, then that gives them the opportunity to share their story and what's happened and why I act and react the way I do. Well, it's because I have Jesus Christ in my heart. Let me explain to you who he is. And that gives them the opportunity to do that. So yeah, that was my thing. That's what I think.
That's cool. Ken, when you are dealing with people in college campuses like you have, do you find that college students and maybe even older teenagers want to have a discussion about spiritual matters, or are they off, or I don't know?
I think that the college, okay, this is going to sound really weird. The college university setting is probably one of the easiest settings that I can think of for sharing Christ. You're in an academic arena. Inquiry is the name of the game. right now we're also very much into everybody's opinion. I mean, that's no different from the rest of society, but in college, everybody's very free with their opinions. And so if you want to start a conversation, you just go out and ask somebody, well, what do you think about this? And they are not hesitant at all. They're being trained up in that arena to express themselves. Having college students willing to go out and just engage in conversations. Simple requests like, hey, we're just out on campus today praying with people. Is there anything that we can pray with you about? Or we're just out having conversations with folks about spiritual things. And would you mind if we just chatted for a little bit? And they're just very upfront. There's not a lot of beat around the bush. There's not a lot of time to do that if you're just catching them between classes or whatever. But it is, I mean, if you're willing to be bold enough to do it, the college campus is a great place to do this, because really it's a no holds barred environment. It's different from in the workplace that the adults would have to deal with. Well, I'm restricted and all this. And yes, you can't abuse anybody, and some people are going to feel abused by these conversations. So you have to be careful.
I understand. You just back off.
Yeah, you just, if they say, no, I don't want you to pray for me. Okay, fine. Have a great day. And then you pray for them as they walk away. So it's okay. But it's a great arena. But we just are trying to help the older youth, the college age, really be bold in just initiating conversations.
Okay.
You know, Mark, we had a
That's
guest speaker come speak at our homecoming, actually the day before the CABA meeting. And he was talking about his personal evangelism, and he leads out with just 3 worldview questions and says, hey, I'd love to chat about worldview. You know, would you mind answering some questions? And so he asks them about, how things came to be. And he asks them if are people inherently good or are they inherently evil? And he asks them a couple other questions. And then he says, he basically said what he tells them is, well, I'm not sure I could have that worldview. That's really interesting that you have that worldview. I'm not sure I could hold to it. And then what they do is they respond with like, well, why? And primarily the question that gets people is that they will say man is inherently good. And he's like, well, I don't know how you could believe that man is inherently good when we see all this evil that people do, and it starts into this question. And then he leads from there with, I think the only worldview that really is accurate is the Christian worldview. And that's what I hold to. And it's just another one of those ways, like Ken said, you have to find ways to start conversations with people and open the door.
Great. Guys, listen, I want to wrap this up by thanking everybody. We can continue to talk after I turn off the recording, obviously. But before we go, I just wanted to recognize verbally, Jason, thank you for chairing this. You're at First Baptist South Lebanon. Danny Calvez, you're a youth worker at Clough Pike. Ken, thank you for serving. You have been campus ministry for a long time, collegiate ministry group, and also pastor at First Baptist Mount Healthy. Tyler Evans at Urban Crest Baptist Church as the youth worker there. Tyler working with youth at Summit Church in Cincinnati. Bink Garbett at Georgetown Baptist Church, and Tom Leach at Faith Baptist Church. Bink and Tom were pastors on there as well. I just want you to know how much I appreciated you guys, and we're really glad that we were able to spend some time together. Now, I'm going to stop the recording right here, and we can keep going. Hang on.